The wind howled like a beast in pain, a deep, mournful cry that echoed across the endless expanse of the Atlantic. The deck beneath my feet shuddered as the ship groaned under the strain, every rivet and weld tested by the fury of the storm. Rain pelted down in sheets, so dense that it felt like the ocean itself had risen up to engulf us. I clung to the railing, my knuckles white as I stared into the abyss. The darkness was all-consuming, an oppressive black void that swallowed everything beyond the ship's limited lights. I couldn't see the waves, but I could feel them, massive and relentless, tossing the ship like a toy. My stomach churned with every sickening rise and fall, but I was too focused on staying upright to care. "Damn it!" I muttered, wiping the salt spray from my eyes. My slicker did little to keep me dry. The wind found every gap and the cold bit into my skin. I was soaked through, my clothes clinging to me like a second skin. This was supposed to be a routine trip, just another cruise ship through the Atlantic, catering to the usual crowd of vacationers. But this storm, it was unlike anything I had ever seen. The captain had given the order to hunker down, to ride it out, but I wasn't sure the ship could take it. I wasn't sure any of us could. The radio crackled to life in my earpiece, the voice barely audible over the storm's roar. "All hands brace for impact." Impact? My heart skipped a beat. What the hell was he talking about? The ship lurched violently to the side, and I lost my grip on the railing, hitting the deck hard. I slid across the slick surface, grasping for anything to stop my momentum. My fingers found a loop of rope, and I clung to it desperately as the ship tipped further, nearly capsizing. That loop of rope, and I clung to it desperately as the ship tipped further, nearly capsizing. Through the driving rain, I caught a glimpse of movement on the deck below. A woman, her hair plastered to her face, chasing after a small dog that was darting frantically between the scattered deck chairs. The dog, a little white terrier, was terrified, its eyes wide with panic as it tried to escape the chaos. The woman was shouting, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm, but it was clear she was desperate to catch her pet before it was swept overboard. Without thinking, I let go of the rope and scrambled down the slick, tilting deck towards them. The dog slipped on the wet surface, skidding dangerously close to the railing, and the woman lunged for it, missing by inches. My heart pounded as I raced to close the distance, the ship's violent rocking making it almost impossible to keep my balance. The dog yelped as another gust of wind nearly lifted it off its feet, and I knew there was no time to waste. I reached out, my hand brushing against the leash just as the dog bolted again, and I grabbed it tightly, pulling the terrified animal towards me. "Here!" I shouted, thrusting the leash into the woman's hands. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she managed to nod, clutching the dog to her chest. "We need to get inside. Now!" I didn't wait for her response. I grabbed her arm and pulled her towards the nearest hatch, the ship groaning ominously beneath us. The deck was slick and angled sharply, making every step a struggle. I could feel the ship straining against the waves, every fiber of it threatening to give way. Just as we reached the hatch, a massive wave slammed into the side of the ship, the force of it nearly knocking us off our feet. I shoved the woman through the door, holding it open long enough to ensure she was inside before I followed, slamming it shut behind us. The ship shuddered violently, but we were safe, at least for the moment, inside the relative shelter of the lower decks. As I was about to enter the safety of the lower decks, I took one final look at the deck, and I saw what looked like a little girl walking by herself towards the storm. Screaming, I bolted towards her. Then, without warning, the world turned upside down. The ship flipped, a massive, bone-jarring heave that sent everything tumbling. I was weightless for a heartbeat, then crashed down as gravity reasserted itself, slamming me against the ceiling, which was now the floor. My head struck something hard and my vision blurred. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and gasping for breath, trying to make sense of the chaos around me. Everything was wrong, disoriented. The deck was above me, the furniture and the equipment that wasn't bolted down now littered the inverted ceiling. Water sloshed around my legs, cold and biting. It was getting deeper. I struggled to my feet, pain flaring in my side where I had hit the bulkhead. The emergency lights flickered, casting an eerie, strobing glow over the wreckage. I could hear screams, distant and muffled, but I couldn't tell where they were coming from. The ship creaked and groaned as it shifted, the sound of metal straining against metal filling the air. "Help!" I called out, my voice hoarse. "Is anyone there?" No response. Only the storm's rage, the ship's tortured noises, and that strange, distant screaming. I forced myself to move, stumbling through the water towards what should have been the stairwell, my boots sloshing with every step. My only thought was to get out, to find a way to safety before the ship went down completely. The passage was barely recognizable, a twisted maze of debris and water. I had to duck under a piece of broken piping, the sharp edge slicing through my slicker. The pain barely registered. My entire focus was on survival, on finding a way out. But the darkness was absolute, a suffocating void that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of light. Even with my hand just inches from my face, I could barely make out the shape of my fingers. It was as though the ship itself had sunk into the abyss, leaving behind the world of the living and plunging into a nightmarish realm where no light could penetrate. Every step was a blind gamble, my heart pounding in my chest as I felt my way forward, desperate to avoid the unseen dangers lurking in the shadows. In the midst of this chaotic symphony, I could hear faint, desperate screams, rising and falling like the tide. They were coming from other parts of the ship, distant voices trapped behind closed doors or buried under debris. Their cries, a haunting reminder that I was not alone in this nightmare. The sound of terror-stricken passengers calling out for help was heart-wrenching, but I was powerless to reach them. And then a sudden, deafening roar reverberated through the ship, a massive explosion somewhere far below in the engine room. The shockwave rattled the walls and sent a tremor through the deck, the vibrations traveling up through my legs and into my chest. For a brief moment, the ship seemed to lurch, as if the very foundation beneath me had shifted, and I knew the situation was even more dire than I had imagined. The blackness was more than just a lack of light. It was a living thing, pressing in on all sides, amplifying every creak of metal and distant splash of water. My breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, each one a small puff of warmth against the freezing cold of the air. I moved slowly, my hands outstretched in front of me, feeling for walls, for anything solid to guide me. The darkness made every moment stretch into an eternity, every sound a potential threat. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the depths of the pitch-black void, unseen but ever present, waiting for the right moment to strike. The water was rising faster now, already up to my knees. I felt the first tendrils of panic coil around my chest, tightening with every breath. I tried to push it down, to stay focused, but it was hard when every instinct screamed that I was running out of time. The ship rocked violently, throwing me against the bulkhead again. I clutched at a pipe, trying to steady myself as the noise grew louder. The screams were closer now, more frantic, as if whatever was out there was hunting, picking off survivors one by one. I had to get out. I had to find higher ground, somewhere drier, somewhere safe. I forced myself to move faster, ignoring the pain, ignoring the rising water, ignoring the ominous noises that seemed to follow me. Up ahead, I saw a door that was still intact, slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into a room that had once been a passenger cabin. It was as wrecked as the rest of the ship, the furniture scattered, the bed frame twisted, but it was dry, at least for now. I collapsed onto the upturned bed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room was pitch black, the emergency lights outside casting only the faintest glow through the crack in the door. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip it. When I finally managed to switch it on, the beam cut through the darkness, revealing the room's disarray. And then I saw it, the body. It was draped across the ceiling, or what had once been the floor, half covered by a blanket. A passenger from the look of the clothes. I felt a wave of nausea rise up, not just from the sight, but from the knowledge that I was not alone in this nightmare. I knelt beside the body. I pulled the blanket over it, a feeble attempt at dignity in this hellish place. "Sorry," I whispered, though I knew they couldn't hear me. "I'm so sorry." I backed away, my heart pounding. I couldn't stay here, but I didn't know where else to go. The growling was still out there, closer now, and the screams had stopped altogether. I realized what that might mean. I lay down on the bed, exhaustion crashing over me like a wave. I tried to keep my eyes open, to stay alert, but it was a losing battle. My body ached, my mind was foggy, and before I knew it, I was drifting into a fitful sleep. I don't know how long I slept. Hours? The storm was still raging when I awoke, the ship still groaning under the strain. But something was different. The air was colder, the water around my feet deeper, and the growling, it was inside the room. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight had rolled away in my sleep, its beam pointing towards the far wall. I strained to see, to hear anything other than the storm. And then I heard it, the soft rustle of fabric, the slow, deliberate sound of something moving. The blanket I had wrapped around the body was shifting, as if something was crawling beneath it. Panic surged through me. I scrambled off the bed, backing away until I hit the wall. The flashlight flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. The blanket moved again, this time more violently, as if whatever was beneath it was trying to free itself. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. My fear overrode everything else. I bolted for the door, yanking it open with a strength I didn't know I had. The hallway was flooded, the water waist deep now, but I didn't care. I waded into it, half running, half swimming, desperate to get as far away from that room as possible. The ship lurched again, throwing me off balance, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to get out. I had to survive, even if it meant facing the water. I found the nearest hatch and threw it open, the water rushing in around me as I plunged into the darkness. I swam blindly, my lungs burning, my heart pounding. The storm was still raging, but now I couldn't hear it, the water muting everything but the sound of my own breath and the pulse of my heartbeat in my ears. I had no idea where I was going, no idea if I was swimming up or down, if I was heading towards safety or deeper into the abyss. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a light faint and flickering, but unmistakable. Hope flared in my chest. It had to be the surface, a searchlight, maybe even a rescue boat. I kicked harder, every muscle screaming in protest as I propelled myself towards it. The light flickered and pulsed, casting eerie, shifting shadows in the water around me. As I swam closer, my initial hope began to give way to unease. The source of the light was not a distant, comforting beam from the surface, but something far more disturbing. Emerging from the blackness, the shape became clearer, a hulking, monstrous form that defied everything I had ever known about the creatures of the deep. The light was not from a searchlight or a rescue boat. It dangled from a long, sinuous appendage, swaying hypnotically in the water like the bait on a fisherman's line. One could only call it a lanternfish, but this one was enormous, its body easily the size of a building, stretching out into the murky darkness beyond the reach of its own glow. Its skin was slick and mottled, covered in scars and pockmarks from a lifetime spent in the crushing depths. Jagged teeth, each one the length of my arm, jutted from its gaping maw, interlocking like a grotesque puzzle. The fish's eyes were milky and lifeless, massive orbs that seemed to stare into nothingness, yet I could feel its gaze on me, as if it was fully aware of my presence, fully aware of its next meal. The lantern itself was a grotesque mockery of light, a giant, pulsating orb that dangled from the end of a thick, scarred tendril. It was mesmerizing in its own horrifying way, casting an otherworldly glow that illuminated the fish's monstrous features. The light wavered as the appendage moved, revealing deep gashes and wounds on the creature's face, as if it had survived countless battles in the darkness of the deep ocean. The sight of it filled me with a primal terror, an instinctive understanding that I was nothing more than prey to this ancient, nightmarish beast. The water around me seemed to hum with its presence, the very pressure of its bulk displacing the sea and sending vibrations through the cold, dark abyss. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing, the light reflecting off something smooth and wet. With only a few seconds left of air before the darkness envelops me, I felt a last burst of energy. I knew what to do. I dive deeper, deeper. I dive into its gaping maw,